All right, we're going to move on now with Media Watch with James Creedon, who's joined me here in the studio. Hi there,
Catherine.
James. And we are looking back at some French domestic politics to start off Media Watch today. François Hollande, has he kicked off his election campaign in a sort of a stealthy manner today? It would seem that way.
It looks like it. It's been definitely stealth in this regard because his political allies came out last week with a sort of big snappy slogan in favour of his record. And now he himself at a conference on the political left organised by the Jean Jaurès Foundation made the the last speech at that conference, and essentially it was the opening salve of his 2017 re-election campaign. He vigorously, ferociously defended his record over the last 4 years, which has been mercilessly attacked by a lot of people on the political left, saying that this was not a left-wing sort of set of policies. For example, the labour law reform is widely being interpreted as business-friendly, and it's, of course, being massively disputed by unions and whatnot. So he catalogued everything that has been done by the left in history, Catherine. The law on the separation of church and state, for example, in 1905, the minimum wage, paid holidays, the 35-hour working week, none of which was done in the last 4 years. That was all thanks to his predecessors on the political left. He did, of course, then catalogue policies that were brought in during his presidency that will be interpreted as left-wing and progressive, for example, gay marriage legislation. And he said if there was a red thread or line to go through all of these different periods when the left was in power, you would see that this represents a progressive line, the progressive current in politics. And a lot of snappy little slogans were issued as well. And indeed, the Huffington Post is saying, is this really going to be the sort of axis of his campaign, the central line of his campaign? The payoff will not be in history, it will be in the future. In other words, I'm not thinking about the history books, I'm thinking about slow and steady reforms that will pay off in the future. He also said things like, I had to lift up the economy before I looked at issues such as redistribution. In other words, answering critics who say his policies weren't, kind enough to those who are less well off. He said, first of all, we had to get the economy back up and running before we redistribute. In any case, a lot of headlines looking at that today, interpreting that speech, trying to figure out how the 2017 re-election campaign will be pitched by the Hollande camp. And here is one way of summing it up: against a left wing that is overly nostalgic, and a right wing that wants to undo everything. Indeed, he was very critical of some on the political right who were threatening to undo, for example, the gay marriage legislation or other reforms of François Hollande.
All right, so he's not really come out and attacked the right wing very much up to now, has he? What sort of things did he say? Well,
for example, he said that there are those really who just want to undo what I've been doing, and it will take them an awful lot of time because we have done a lot. In other words, if they want to spend all of their time undoing it,
it's a tapestry.
Right.
You can try.
I think it's one thing to defend your record; it's another thing when you start attacking the opposition. That's I think a clear sign that you are in political campaign mode. It's not just what François Hollande said today, though. It's also what his advisors are saying, attacking some of his political opponents. Alain Juppé, for example, who is the favourite to represent the political right, he said, well, he was a minister during the era of the Soviet Union. In other words, he's an old fogey. He's a man from the distant past.
Other people might say he's got loads of experience.
That's right. But also, before you criticise Alain Juppé for being a politician during the Soviet Union, you better make sure your man was not a politician during the Soviet Union, which he was. So that led for a pretty open and easy, return of the ball. He should be reminded that Hollande was an advisor at the Élysée Palace and an MP when there was still the USSR. So there you go. That was a pretty, fail, a bit of a fail, I would say, in terms of political attack.
Just briefly, another clue: François Hollande might be in campaign mode. He seems to be kind of refusing to back this TTIP, transatlantic trade deal. That's
right, this trade deal, which has been oft criticised for being conducted, the negotiations being conducted too privately, the citizens not being aware of how it's going to impact on everyday life, for example. And François Hollande has now said this just 48 hours after a Greenpeace leak of elements of that deal, which seem to indicate that the US is sort of putting a lot of pressure on the EU to go through. In any case, François Hollande saying, I'm not going to back something that is against French interests, or that reveals irreconcilable differences with French interests. Many people translating that really as François Hollande trying to put out a fire 1 year ahead of the presidential election. That is a trade deal that is very massively rejected by the political left, that is seen as overly business friendly, etc. And so many people in their tweets are linking that decision by François Hollande not to back the TTIP deal with the 2017 election campaign and a bid not to be cast as a poodle of the Americans, as this cartoon cast him in relation to TTIP some time ago.
Okay, and France is such a big player in Europe, of course, that if France isn't backing it, will the rest of Europe be able to? We'll have to wait and see. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Catherine.
James Cretin there with Media Watch.